The Alaskan winter of 1888 didn't just arrive. It descended like a silent, relentless predator. By late October, a biting wind, sharp as a hunter's knife, already tore through the gnarled spruces that hunched over Elara Vance's isolated cabin deep in the wilderness. Inside, the meager fire in the stone hearth offered little solace against the creeping chill that seemed to seep from the very logs of the walls. Elara, her belly a prominent swell of new life, shivered constantly, not just from the cold, but from a gnawing fear that had settled deep in her bones since her husband, Thomas, had been lost to the unforgiving Yukon River months ago. Every ache in her lower back, every contraction like spasm, sent a fresh wave of panic through her. She was alone, utterly alone, with a baby due any day, miles from the nearest semblance of human civilization, her supplies dwindling. That afternoon, a thick, wet snow began to fall, muffling the world in an oppressive, suffocating silence. It clung to the branches, transforming the harsh landscape into a deceptive, beautiful shroud. Elara, desperate for a few more logs to feed the dying embers, pulled on her thickest wool coat, though it barely fit over her advanced pregnancy, and ventured outside. The air was heavy, the flakes large and relentless, quickly burying the sparse, familiar trail to her woodpile beneath a rapidly accumulating white blanket. Her movements were slow, each step a struggle against the rising drifts and her own burgeoning weariness. The world spun for a moment, then another, a dizzying sensation accompanied by a sharp, searing pain that lanced through her lower back. She stumbled, clutching her distended abdomen, trying to regain her footing, but the icy ground offered no purchase. Her vision narrowed, the towering snow-laden trees blurring into an indistinct grey vortex. A final, agonizing lurch, a desperate gasp for air, and the unyielding Alaskan earth rose to meet her. The cold, relentless and immediate, seeped into her bones as consciousness flickered, then extinguished, leaving her utterly exposed to the rapidly intensifying storm, a fragile life within her, facing the bleak, indifferent wilderness. Please, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more compelling stories like this one. Miles away, a solitary figure named Silas Croft pushed through the same relentless blizzard. He was a man whose very being seemed etched by the wilderness, his face deeply weathered by sun and wind, his eyes sharp and wary, constantly scanning the vast white expanse. He'd been trapping for years, drawn to the profound solitude and the raw, untamed challenge of the unforgiving North, a stark contrast to a past he preferred to leave buried and forgotten. His own cabin, a day's journey further north, felt less like a warm home and more like a Spartan refuge. He was heading south, making his last desperate supply run before the deep winter truly locked everything down, before the trails became impassable. The storm, however, had caught him off guard, turning the familiar, often indistinct trail into a treacherous, blinding white expanse where every tree looked the same. He was pushing his sled Kodiak, a powerful husky, with eyes the color of a winter sky, through a particularly dense stand of snow-laden pines when the dog suddenly stopped, ears perked, a low, guttural growl rumbling deep in his chest. Silas, his own instincts immediately on high alert, squinted through the swirling, blinding snow, his breath pluming in thick clouds in the frigid air. A dark, unnatural shape lay partially obscured by a fresh drift near a small, dilapidated cabin he'd never noticed before, almost swallowed by the relentless snowfall. Curiosity, a rare and almost dangerous luxury in his solitary life, battled fiercely with his innate caution and survival instincts. As he drew closer, pushing through the knee-deep snow, the shape resolved into a human form, unmistakably a woman, lying terrifyingly still in the snow. A jolt of pure, unadulterated alarm shot through him, chilling him far more than the biting wind. He moved quickly, his heavy boots crunching through the frozen crust, Kodiak at his heels, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The sight of her swollen belly, unmistakable even beneath her heavy, snow-covered clothing, sent an even colder dread through him. He knew, with a certainty that settled heavy and cold in his gut, that he couldn't simply leave her to the mercy of the elements. It was an impossible, unthinkable act. Silas moved with a practiced, almost primal efficiency, every movement precise despite the urgency of the situation. He knelt quickly beside Ilara, his thick, gloved fingers pressing gently against the side of her neck, searching for a sign of life. A faint, thready pulse fluttered beneath his touch, a fragile lifeline in the vast emptiness. Her exposed skin was dangerously cold, the blue tinge of her lips a grim indicator. He quickly assessed the dire situation. Severe hypothermia was setting in, and the distinct, unmistakable look of imminent childbirth was starkly evident on her pale, drawn face. There was no time to fetch help. The small, forlorn cabin, despite its meager appearance, was her only chance. He scooped her carefully into his arms, surprised by her lightness despite her advanced pregnancy, a testament to her isolation and likely malnutrition. Kodiak, sensing the profound urgency, whined softly, nudging Silas's leg, his intelligent eyes fixed on the unconscious woman. Getting her inside the small, frigid cabin was an immediate struggle. The rough-hewn door, stiff and frozen from the prolonged cold, protested with a loud groan as he forced it open, snow blowing in with the gust of wind. Inside, the air was stale and heavy, thick with the scent of old, damp wood and unspoken desperation. A single rough cot stood against one wall, a few tattered thin blankets piled on it. He gently laid her down, his movements as tender as his rough hands could manage, then immediately set about the life-saving task of building a fire. His fingers, stiff and numb from the prolonged cold, fumbled for a moment with the kindling, but the spark caught, and soon a small, hopeful flame began to dance in the grimy hearth, casting wavering shadows on the walls. While the cabin slowly, painfully slowly, began to warm, he rummaged through her meager supplies, finding a chipped pot and some dried, unidentifiable herbs. He melted handfuls of snow for water, preparing a rudimentary bitter tea, hoping to warm her from the inside out, to coax some life back into her frozen veins. The wind outside continued to howl, a relentless, predatory beast, but inside, a new kind of battle had just begun. One against the unforgiving elements and the woman's fragile, fading hold on life. The long, arduous hours bled into a hazy, dreamlike succession of urgent, desperate activity. As the fire crackled and spat, casting dancing, flickering shadows on the rough-hewn cabin walls, Ilara's contractions intensified, her moans becoming more frequent, more desperate. Silas, despite his long-held commitment to a solitary existence, found himself irrevocably thrust into the role of an unlikely midwife. He had witnessed births on the frontier before, knew the raw, untamed process in its visceral reality, but never like this, with a complete stranger, in the heart of a raging blizzard, miles from any form of assistance. He spoke to her in low, calming tones, offering what little comfort he could, his own anxieties a tight, cold knot in his stomach, a mixture of fear for her and a profound sense of responsibility. The primal, guttural sounds of labor filled the small, claustrophobic space, a raw testament to life, fighting with fierce desperation against overwhelming, almost impossible odds. Finally, with a cry that was both a gasp of exhaustion and a triumph of the will, a tiny, squalling baby girl was born into the harsh, indifferent Alaskan night. Ilara, utterly spent but her face radiant with an ethereal glow, held her miniature daughter close, tears of relief and overwhelming love streaming silently down her pale cheeks. Silas, witnessing the fragile new life, so vulnerable yet so potent, felt something profound shift within him, a softening he hadn't known was possible, a long-dormant part of his soul stirring. He moved with a newfound gentleness, cleaning the baby carefully with warm, damp cloths, wrapping her snugly in the warmest, albeit tattered blanket he could find, and watched as Ilara, with a natural instinct, began to nurse her. The bond forged in those desperate life-or-death hours was unspoken yet undeniably present, a profound connection born of shared struggle and unexpected raw kindness. The storm continued to rage outside, its fury undiminished, but within the small, dimly lit cabin, a flicker of profound hope, a vibrant promise of new beginnings, born of shared adversity and an unexpected, deep human connection, had ignited, casting a warm, comforting glow. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every subscription helps us bring more untold stories to light. The days that followed the birth were a delicate balance of Ilara's arduous recovery and an almost palpable, unspoken tension that hung in the air. Ilara, though still profoundly weak, slowly, painstakingly regained her strength, her entire focus now consumed by the fragile new life she held in her arms, her newborn, whom she lovingly named Clara. Silas, despite his original, deeply ingrained intention to continue his journey further north, found himself lingering. The blizzard, though less intense, had not fully abated, making immediate travel still dangerous and unwise. But a deeper, more profound reason rooted him stubbornly to the spot. He saw the sheer fragility of Ilara and Clara, the immense, almost insurmountable task ahead for a lone woman trying to survive, let alone thrive, in this unforgiving wilderness with an infant. And something within him, long dormant and hardened, stirred with an unexpected sense of protectiveness. He spent his days with a quiet, efficient resolve, chopping wood with powerful, practiced swings of the axe, hunting small game, his rifle rarely missing its mark, and meticulously maintaining the small cabin, his movements economical and quiet, almost reverent. Ilara, for her part, watched him with a mixture of profound gratitude and a wary, almost analytical curiosity. She knew he was a man of the wilderness, forged by its harsh demands, unaccustomed to the nuances of domesticity or the vulnerability of others, yet he tended to them both with a quiet, unwavering dedication that surprised her. The silence in the cabin was often heavy, punctuated only by Clara's soft, innocent whimpers or the comforting, rhythmic crackling of the fire. Both adults were acutely, painfully aware of the temporary nature of their arrangement, and the inevitable, terrifying question loomed unspoken between them, a dark cloud on the horizon. What would happen when the storm finally broke completely, when the paths cleared and the world outside beckoned him back to his solitary life? The very thought of Silas leaving brought a familiar cold pang of fear to Ilara's heart, a fear that she now shared, magnified tenfold with the tiny, vulnerable life she held so carefully in her arms. One particularly frigid evening, with the wind a mournful whine outside the cabin and Clara sleeping peacefully, nestled in a makeshift cradle, Ilara finally found the strength and courage to speak of her past. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but steady, imbued with a quiet resilience. She spoke of Thomas, her husband, a kind but ultimately restless soul, perpetually lured by the deceptive promise of gold, who had ventured up the treacherous Yukon River months ago and never, ever returned. She spoke of their shared dreams of a new life, a fresh start in this remote Alaskan wilderness, dreams that had been cruelly shattered by his loss, leaving her isolated and utterly bereft. Silas listened intently, his gaze fixed on the mesmerizing, dancing flames in the hearth, his own features unreadable, but the familiar, dull ache of his own long-buried history began to resurface, a ghost whispering from the shadows of his memory. He had come to Alaska years ago, a deliberate act of self-exile, to escape a profound tragedy, a loving family torn apart by a cruel twist of fate, a heavy burden of responsibility and guilt he still carried, a constant weight on his soul. He shared little in return, only hinting at a life back east, a life of unbearable loss and deep regret that had driven him to seek the absolute solitude of the north, where the vastness matched the emptiness he felt inside. But in their shared vulnerability, in the quiet unfolding of their respective tragedies, a subtle, profound shift occurred between them. The formidable walls they had each built around themselves, constructed of solitude and self-preservation, began to lower, brick by careful, hesitant brick. They were two broken individuals, brought together by an improbable stroke of fate and extreme circumstance, finding an unexpected quiet solace in each other's tentative presence. The world outside remained harsh, indifferent and untamed, a constant reminder of their fragility, but within the small, warm cabin, a fragile understanding, a shared burden of profound loneliness, began to knit them together, weaving a new, delicate tapestry of connection. Weeks bled into a month, then another. The snow, once an omnipresent, relentless force, began to show subtle, hopeful signs of softening, the days slowly, almost imperceptibly, lengthening. The iron grip of winter was, at long last, beginning to loosen, and with its retreat came the unspoken yet palpable pressure of impending decisions. Ilara, visibly stronger now, her color returning, watched Silas with a new, deeply considered perspective. He had been her unexpected savior, a steadfast, unwavering presence in her darkest, most vulnerable hours. His quiet strength, his unwavering dedication, his silent, consistent support had become the bedrock of her new, fragile reality. She knew, with a chilling clarity, that she could not survive the Alaskan wilderness alone with an infant, not truly, not without succumbing to its immense, brutal demands. Silas, too, wrestled fiercely with his own thoughts, torn between the ingrained habits of a lifetime of solitude and an emerging profound sense of connection. The powerful lure of his solitary life, of returning to the untouched wild vastness of the distant mountains, was undeniably strong, a comforting, familiar pull. But the cabin, once merely a temporary shelter, now held the vibrant warmth of a small, nascent family. He found himself drawn irresistibly to Clara's gurgling coos, to her tiny, grasping fingers, to Ilara's quiet resilience and the knowing look in her eyes. The very idea of leaving them, of returning to a life without their presence, felt hollow, empty, devoid of meaning. He walked out into the crisp, thawing air, the sharp, clean scent of pine and melting snow filling his lungs, the sounds of dripping water a hopeful melody. The vast landscape, still wild and untamed, no longer felt as lonely as it once did. He made his way back to the cabin, a quiet, settled resolve firming in his heart. When he entered, Ilara looked up from mending a blanket, her eyes wide, questioning, filled with a fragile hope. He simply nodded, a silent, profound promise hanging in the air between them, sealing their unexpected future. If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. We've got so many more incredible narratives to share with you. The arrival of spring brought not only a thaw, but a flurry of new challenges, paradoxically intertwined with a renewed, tangible sense of purpose for both Ilara and Silas. With Ilara's gradually improving strength, she began to work tirelessly alongside Silas, reinforcing the cabin walls, patching the roof, making it sturdier against the relentless, often brutal Alaskan weather. He meticulously taught her the intricate art of setting snares for rabbits, how to identify the surprisingly abundant edible plants and berries that emerged with the thaw, and perhaps most importantly, how to read the subtle, nuanced signs of the wilderness. The flight of birds, the scent of damp earth, the whisper of the wind through the trees. Ilara, a remarkably quick and eager student, absorbed every lesson with an intense focus, her determination fueled by her fierce, burgeoning love for Clara and a newfound sense of agency. They worked side by side, their movements gradually becoming synchronized, a silent, efficient partnership. Their communication often transcended words, a glance, a shared smile, a subtle nod conveying a depth of understanding. Their days quickly settled into a demanding but fulfilling rhythm of survival and domesticity. The rhythmic thud of an axe chopping wood, the precise snap of a trap closing on small game, the steady hum of fishing lines, the painstaking preparation of food, and the constant joyful tending to Clara's needs. The cabin, once a place of desperate, solitary survival, slowly but surely transformed into a true home, filled with the warmth of shared laughter, the quiet hum of contentment, and the vibrant energy of new life. Silas, once so reticent, found himself talking more, sharing fragmented stories of his past, his cautious dreams for the future, things he hadn't vocalized or even dared to think of in years. Ilara, in turn, opened up further, her lingering grief for Thomas still present, a quiet shadow but now beautifully mingled with a growing, vibrant hope for the future they were building together. They were unmistakably building a life, not just a mere shelter, brick by careful, deliberate brick, in the very heart of the unforgiving wild, weaving their separate threads into a single, strong tapestry. Life in the Alaskan wilderness, even for those as resilient as Ilara and Silas, was never without its profound hardships, its unexpected cruelties. A late spring snowstorm, a sudden, fierce squall threatened their painstakingly planted garden, burying the tender shoots under a fresh layer of ice. A lean summer meant hunting was harder than usual, their traps often empty, their larder dwindling, forcing them to stretch their meager provisions to the limit. There were countless moments of intense frustration, of chilling fear, of bone-deep exhaustion that tested their resolve to its absolute breaking point. One particularly harsh winter, far more brutal than any they had yet endured, a relentless fever swept through the isolated cabin, leaving both Ilara and a terrifyingly vulnerable Clara weak, feverish, and teetering on the brink. Silas, his face grim with worry, worked tirelessly, his sleep almost non-existent, nursing them both back to health with a quiet, fierce determination, his unwavering presence a fortress against the encroaching despair that threatened to consume them. Through every challenge, every shared burden, every near catastrophe, their bond deepened, growing richer and more complex. They learned to rely on each other implicitly, their individual strengths compensating perfectly for each other's weaknesses, creating an unshakable partnership. Ilara witnessed Silas's unwavering loyalty, his quiet, steadfast dedication, his surprising deep compassion for both her and Clara. Silas, in turn, witnessed Ilara's remarkable, almost superhuman resilience, her fierce, boundless love for Clara, her astonishing ability to find joy and beauty in the smallest, most mundane things, a stark contrast to his own often somber nature. Their relationship wasn't one of grand, sweeping declarations or romantic gestures, but rather of quiet acts of service, of shared burdens silently carried, and of a profound, unspoken understanding that transcended mere words. They were unequivocally a family, forged not by blood, but by shared survival, by mutual respect, and by a profound, enduring affection that had blossomed unexpectedly in the heart of the wild. Years bled into a decade. Clara, once a fragile newborn, grew into a strong, spirited young girl, her infectious laughter echoing through the cabin and bouncing off the surrounding ancient forest. She learned to hunt and fish with a quiet competence from Silas, to identify the secret edible treasures of the land, and tell captivating stories from Ilara, her mind quick and curious. Their isolated cabin, once a lonely, desolate outpost, slowly transformed into a vibrant, bustling home, filled with the comforting hum of a family truly united, truly belonging. The faint scars of their past remained, subtle reminders of loss and hardship, but they no longer defined them. Instead, they were testaments to their survival, to their enduring strength. They had built something entirely new, something resilient and profoundly enduring, from the ashes of despair and the vast, untamed wilderness. Silas and Ilara, their faces now showing the gentle lines of time, weathered by sun and wind, etched with the shared experiences of a lifetime, would often sit by the roaring fire in the evenings. They'd watch Clara, now a young woman, sleeping peacefully, or listen with quiet pride as she spun her own captivating tales of the forest. Their hands, calloused and strong from years of arduous work, would sometimes find each other, a silent, comforting touch, a profound testament to the extraordinary journey they had shared. He had carried her in, a collapsed pregnant widow, on that fateful snow-swept day, and he had indeed stayed for the rest of her life, not out of any obligation or duty, but out of a profound, enduring love that had bloomed in the most unexpected, isolated, and challenging of places. The Alaskan wilderness, once a fearsome symbol of their individual struggles and solitude, had become, ironically, the majestic backdrop for their shared triumph, a living testament to the indomitable resilience of the human spirit and the transformative, all-encompassing power of connection. Their story, etched into the vast, silent landscape, was a quiet, unassuming epic of love, survival, and the enduring strength of a family forged against all imaginable odds. Thank you for watching. We hope the pregnant widow collapsed outside her cabin, he carried her in and stayed for the rest of her life, resonated with you. Please subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life stories that touch the heart.